there. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. And got to get my clicker here. There we go. Whoop, too far. Got to get used to this thing. Okay. Well, first off, my name is Tom Yingling, and I'm here to present to you a history of the Codorus Valley. But we'll start off with some of the things people ask me when they first meet me is, am I related to the brewery people? I don't know why, but anyhow, the answer is no. And you see up there a spelling of my name, Tom Yingling, and there's a spelling of the brewery. And over here on the right is the original spelling, J-U with an N-G, L-I-N-G. And you'll still find it spelled like that over in Germany. But basically, the reason I say that, and again, all of our names have been corrupted to some degree or another over the years, even if your name is Smith. It was spelled differently way back in the day. So, but anyhow, the reason I bring that up is, Christian Yingling, who's the first ancestor for my family line, he landed here in 1710 in Philadelphia, settled a little bit further east, and he had two sons by the name of Abraham and Johann. They moved across the Susquehanna River back in 1733. They followed the Monocacy Trail, which you'll be hearing about, over into around Littlestown, and then shortly after moved down into Carroll County, or what became Carroll County, in Pipe Creek 100 area. But that's my father's side of the family. On my mother's side of the family, we have it's my mother's side is where I tie into the Codorus at Manheim and Shrewsbury Township. And again, back in the 1700s, we have these names up here. Hopefully you can read them. Bauman, Balkman, Bortner, Bricker. Those are just some of the direct family lines that are in my family. And then I had two family lines come in the early 1800s. One Welshman, sort of odd man out, but David Jones, he came up from Maryland. He settled down around Codorus Township originally, but he also bought for a very short time a place called Hetrick's Tavern from Christian Hetrick's back around 1830. He had it about 4 years, but he had a tavern there, and then he went back into the milling business. Frederick Kraft, he came up from Baltimore back around 1810. He's a third-generation German that settled into Baltimore. I haven't found out exactly when that line came over here, but he moved north in 1810, and he settled, purchased enough land, opened up a tavern and a store in an area in Codorus Township, pretty much in the middle of it. And he named that town Jefferson. And so that was founded by my four times great-grandfather there. So you'll be hearing a little bit more about Jefferson. But also, let's see here. My wife's family, Stambaugh, which is over here on the right, they all came over here. Berkheimer, Denlinger, Hubbis, Lookenball, Ritz, Wrights. They settled here in the 1700s. So her family is also from that area, or from this area. But we're not here to talk about my family lines, but what I brought this up for is because I just want to show you the tie-in, the personal connection I have to the Codorus Valley area. And so it gives me a passion and a desire to just study the history. But first, an advertisement. I'm president of the Codorus Valley Area Historical Society. We meet in this building right up here. It's in Jefferson at the south end on Baltimore Street. And by the way, if you look for it GPS, don't put in Codorus, don't put in Jefferson. You got to put in Spring Grove because they don't recognize either one of those places. So we won't go into why it's called Codorus either. But anyhow, we have meetings second Tuesday of the month. I have some brochures back there, some sample newsletters I put out every 2 months. They're back there at the back. You're welcome to take them. And that also gives you more information of when we meet. So you're welcome to do that. I have a basic website, and we also have a Facebook page, Friends of the Codorus Valley Area Historical Society. So that's a pretty active Facebook page, and you're welcome to join that for free. But the Codorus Valley, our territory is shown above, and this is a map of the watersheds of York County. Our name, Codorus Valley Area, would imply we would have something to do with the Codorus Creek watershed, the area between the red lines and the Codorus Creek watershed. Basically, you spill a drop of water or a glass of water anywhere in there, it's going to eventually find its way down to one of the Codorus Creek creeks and eventually make its way out to the Susquehanna. The area marked in yellow is where our territory, and basically it's a combination of area of the Codorus Creek and also just the political lines of the different townships and boroughs. But we include the townships, North Codorus, Heidelberg, Manheim, Springfield townships, along with the boroughs of New Salem, Seven Valleys, Jacobus, Loganville, and Jefferson, plus other small unincorporated communities. We have 4 school districts within our area. We do have some overlap with some of the other historical societies, but unlike our ancestors who, before the Mason-Dixon line was established, we have not had any border disputes. So, but yeah, we do have some. Matter of fact, I guess we have a Doylestown man here. We probably even do some overlap. You probably come into Springfield Township somewhat, don't you? So, oh, just York Township. Okay, then we don't have an overlap. Very good. So, yeah, and, you know, for those of you who are from that area, I am looking for information and, you know, just historical information on Springfield Township. It's an area that we're not too heavy on with information. But anyhow, that's the area we cover. But we're going to start with some of the original settlers that came into this area. And yes, they were settlers. I'll call them indigenous. The Susquehannocks and the Shawnee were some of the main tribes that settled in York County area, along with many others. These groups lived along the main waterways like the Susquehanna River. It is my understanding that what became York County was used as hunting grounds for indigenous. So there were very few large settlements further west of the river in York County. However, they did carve out footpaths and have important places of meeting just beyond the northern end of the Codorus Valley territory. It became known as Pulpit Rock. How many heard of Pulpit Rock? We got a couple people here. All right, so there's Pulpit Rock, and these are 3 different pictures over different time periods up there. And but Pulpit Rock got its name because it functioned like a pulpit or a stage to speak to an audience, located just barely in Spring Garden Township on the east side of the Codorus, just north of where the west branch empties into the main branch of the Codorus. That goes through the city of York and onto the river. And so you can again see the North Codorus, West Manchester, Spring Garden Township. That green box up there, that's where Pulpit Rock is. And you can see the dam down here. The yellow line, the original West Branch, actually went straight through. When they built the dam, they went through a rock you'll see in the next thing. That's what was called Indian Rock. It went through that rock, and the dam was placed right there. And but basically, let's see here. But that wasn't until 1939 that it got its name. We were there, I guess, with Jerry Jones back here, myself, and a couple other folks. We got permission to go visit the rock, and that's what it looks like in 2021. So it looks smaller, and I suspect because of floods, and it's also pretty close to where the settling ponds were for York County. I mean, for York Water Company. I suspect they dug that out and piled some dirt around there. I don't know why. It just doesn't seem as tall as what it did, but they gave us permission to go there. You can't go there now, I think, because I made the mistake of publishing these photos on Facebook. And so now they fenced the whole area in. And but they did give us permission to go in there and actually even cut down some small trees and brush so we could get some good pictures. We did some measurements and did a nice little project. So, you know, all this time, I mean, most of my life, I grew up and thinking I heard of Indian Rock, never knew where it was, didn't even know it was real. And then Jerry said, well, yeah, it's a real place, so I'll take you there sometime. And sure enough, he did, and we saw it. And I tried finding all the pictures I could. There's one more photo you'll see, I think, which is the oldest photo I could find. It's around 1890 that we took of the rock. But this one down at the bottom really looks huge. So anyhow, that's Indian Rock. Next photo. This is what is officially Indian Rock. That's where the dam goes through. You can see it here on the right, and that's the bridge that goes across. How many have been up over that road over top of Indian Rock? On there. But that's a neat place. It's worthwhile stopping. I enjoy looking down there. You can see the crook in the creek that I showed you. You can see where it is. But basically, this dam was built back then after the 1936 flood, and a number of other floods prior to that to help alleviate flooding on the city of York. It is purely for flood control. It serves no other purpose. And I read someplace that the first time this was ever used for flood control was in 1972 with Hurricane Agnes. I find that hard to believe. It's been used quite a number of times since then, even in the 2000s, but it's just hard to believe, like from 1940 all the way to 1972, that it was never activated. So, there is one story, indigenous story, recorded concerning Pulpit Rock by historian George R. Prow in Volume 2 of his 1907 History of York County. Here's a summary of that story. While standing on this rock, a Shawnee queen gathered the warriors together after a defeat by the Susquehannocks to encourage them to go to battle again to defeat the Susquehannocks. The date of the story is unknown, but I'd love to find that out when that occurred. But Susquehannocks and the Shawnee and a number of other tribes, they were, especially in the 1600s and before, they were just fighting each other all the time. But why this rock versus any other rock? Here's that watershed map again. And I guess, yeah, you're looking at it over here. I should point both ways. But anyhow, again, we have the red area, which is the Codorus Creek watershed. And here I highlight the different creeks that make up the Codorus Creek. And again, here's this 1890 photo that I found, and that's the oldest one photo that I could find on Indian Rock. Anyhow, let's go over the 5 different branches. The blue and the yellow down here in the bottom left, within the red, you have the blue one. That's the main west branch. Starts way down at Black Rock, below Hanover, and I'll say this is the largest watershed. It's 278 square miles within York County. We have larger ones like Conewaga, like that, but that starts actually in Maryland, Adams County, and goes on out to the Susquehanna River. But Codorus is fully contained within the York County. Anyhow, the blue line, dark blue line, that's the west branch, goes out through Spring Grove, and continues on till you get to Indian Rock Dam. And you have a sort of a light yellow line down and below there. That's also called the West Branch. I'm not sure why they're both called the West Branch, but that comes up, starts down below Glenville, comes up through Glenville, Sinsheim, and thank you for the error. So anyhow, that comes up that way and dumps in right in front of Lake Marburg Dam. Then we get into the Green Branch. That's the South Branch. That comes up through Shrewsbury, or a little bit west of Shrewsbury, comes up through Glen Rock, Seven Valleys, and a few other places. Finally makes its way just before we get to Indian Rock Dam. Then you have the Blue Branch. That's the East Branch, and that comes all the way through, and that's where we get our water from. At least most of us get our water from. Where does Shrewsbury get water? York Water, or they have your own water source? Okay, very good. So anyhow, that's where a large part of the county even goes over to Adams County, where they feed water. But that's Lake Redmond, Lake Williams, and that Blue Branch. They all join till you get to the Orange Branch, which makes its way north to the Susquehanna River. But right there, that star is where Pulpit Rock is. So here's my theory. When various smaller tribes who were dispersed throughout the area got a message to meet at Pulpit Rock on the day after the full moon, in a time when there were few roads, they would know where to go or how to gather to get to Pulpit Rock. They would utilize 2 geographic features, the creek system and a protruding rock of just the right height. So anyhow, that's my theory on it. Don't know if it's right, but it makes sense. There's one of the other of these similar down in Rock State Park in Hartford County, Maryland. So it's also close to a river or a creek down there. I believe it might be Deer Creek down in that area. But anyhow, they did utilize these not just in York County, so this was just something they had to have a place that just stuck out that they knew how to get to. Okay, here's a interesting map. I know you can't read everything that's on there, but this was probably one of the earliest maps made of the whole area. As you can see, we're in Virginia, but you had, what's interesting is you see a lot of the names of the tribes listed. This was put together by John Smith back in 1606 when he came into down in Virginia, made his way up here, up through the Chesapeake, and went up the Susquehanna River. Now this map is oriented differently. It's a little hard to get used to. I love maps, but anyhow, I didn't have the one with the circle in. I need to change the photo. But way over here in the right corner, can't see it. Yeah, up a little higher where the water would be, over to the left, a little further. Yeah, right there, you're at the Susquehanna River. That's the Susquehanna River. And so on here, he has listed where some of the tribal villages were all around the area. You got the Potomac on there, the Rappahannock, and some other places on there. But that's what how they envisioned this whole area. So to me, it's fun studying these maps to look at these old maps. But anyhow, the Susquehannocks, or let's start going back here, the Shawnee in the area were Algonquin people, as were the Conoy, Delaware, Munsee. It's a little bit like saying, well, you're German, but you're from Europe. You're European. The Algonquin was a broader range of identity. And but they shared a common language, and they shared some other common cultural things, but all of them were quite different. But these were the Shawnee, and as were the Conoy, Delaware, and Munsee. And those were all tribes that came around this area. Being Algonquin meant they shared a similar language and culture. Algonquin lived in the northeast North America, Canada, and the USA, up in New England. They covered a large area. The Susquehannocks were descendants of the Iroquoian-speaking people. They were some of the newcomers in the southern area of the Susquehanna River, possibly in the 1500 time period. No doubt pushing other tribes out as they moved in. From numerous books and articles I've read, it seemed like the Susquehannocks could have been considered the bullies in the area. In the mid-1600s, the 5 Iroquoian nations in New York area had enough of all the fighting going on, and so they put together an intertribal war, and it greatly impacted the Susquehannock population. On top of that, by the 1600s, Europeans were moving closer to the area, which introduced diseases like smallpox, again impacting the population. By the late 1600s, their population was greatly reduced, and they consolidated to a small area around the Conestoga Creek in Lancaster County. People started calling them the Conestoga. With the Susquehannock defeated and greatly weakened, they were considered subservient to the 5 nations up in New York State. 5 nations were 5 different tribes up there that were all of the Iroquoian nations. When William Penn negotiated for areas like Lancaster, York, and Adams County, he traveled to New York State area to negotiate with the 5 nations, not the Susquehannocks in this area. Okay, these are some artifacts that are in our collection. A guy from Jefferson by the name of Clyde Stauffer collected these in the 40s and 50s. 1940s and 50s, and he nicely identified where he found these things, so that makes them really special. As mentioned earlier, larger villages of indigenous seem to settle along the large rivers like the Susquehanna River. West of the Susquehanna River, all the way to the Potomac, was primarily hunting grounds. As they pushed further west, it seems they did settle for a time in locations in parts of the Codorus Valley. They settled in other areas of York County, but since we're focusing on the Codorus Valley, you'll hear that mentioned. Obviously, there were small settlements other places, but we will focus on the various areas of the branches of the Codorus. Just north of Stoverstown, in North Codorus and Spring Grove, along the west branch of the Codorus, stories have been passed down of indigenous activity. Also in the areas of Porter Sidling and Heidelberg, near the dam breast of Codorus State Park and Lake Marburg. Most of the artifacts shown have the farm identified where they were found, and one of the telltale signs of regular indigenous activity was what is called a barren, or barrens. These were areas, sometimes fairly large, that they burned on a regular basis to create meadows which attracted animals for them to hunt. And as I'm digging into deeds and road surveys and whatnot, and I'm finding there were a lot more of these than what I ever imagined. I think there's a major one down here around Airville, and there's a road down there called the Barrens, but that's an indicator that there was Native American activity. There are such things as natural barrens, but virtually all these around here were intentionally cleared out. But I found, my first one I found in the Codorus Valley area was on the 1739 Monocacy Road survey, and it being near the area 116 and Jacobs Mill Road, not too far from Porter Sidling between Hanover and Spring Grove. And there are a number of others, as I mentioned. Even Hanover, I saw there seemed to be, might have been actually a barren, the whole thing, a barren at one time. But I visited various caves and rock shelters, and one of my partners in crime was Jerry Jones back here. He introduced me to a couple of these places, and so he's always fun to go out on these adventures with. So anyhow, one is located in, between Stoverstown and Bear Station along the west branch of the Codorus Creek, another near Porter Sidling above where Crafts Mill was, and on Crafts Mill Road. Another just south of the Mason-Dixon line below Hanover in Carroll County is within the Hanover Water Company watershed near one of the branches of Conowalga Creek. So these are all areas that there were some activities with that people settled. And what you need to understand is there wasn't prime real estate that where they did settle. They basically got the not so prime real estate as far as the Europeans were concerned. This was owned by William Penn or his descendants. They weren't allowed to own land in the area. Let's move on to Europeans coming into the area. Europeans settled initially started settling the southern section of York and Adams County because Maryland laying claim to the land in what became York and Adams and issuing land grants prior to the Penn family, when William Penn had a policy of negotiating and purchasing land from the indigenous before allowing settlers into the area. Now that didn't always work perfectly. There were many attempts and some successful moving into York County prior to that, but officially they weren't supposed to be here. Maryland didn't have quite the solid policy, and they also did some of their negotiating earlier. So Europeans anxious to acquire new land would work through the Maryland government to move west of the Susquehanna. Also, since Lord Baltimore and the Penn family disagreed on where their land allotment started and ended, settlers just went with who put the for sale sign up first. Maryland, believing they owned up to the 40th parallel, which is well north of the city of York, and it's up just over Starview. The Penns, believing they owned land further south, all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay. This presented quite a bit of conflict between the two landowners. George I intervened and told them to come to agreement. A temporary line was created in 1738 and 39, approximately near the current Mason-Dixon line, and finalized in 1765 with the Mason-Dixon line survey. The Maryland land grants allowed settlers to move into Adams County as early as 1720s. They were mostly Scotch-Irish and Roman Catholic and created a settlement known as Conowalga Settlement, now Hanover. The red boxes represent that you see up here. See, I got them numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. Not necessarily of how much area that they took up. It's just number 2, that's Diggs Choice. That was 10,000 acres, went down into Maryland, Adams County, over into western York County, and was just a big area by John Diggs. And he was kind of, well, you could say almost like the William Penn of with Maryland. So he had that, and you see a couple settlements in there. So you have John Stinkham, 1719, John Diggs, 1727, William Logston, 1729, and Andrew Hershey and Christian Hershey. Now these were the first 2 Germans to officially move into York County. Andrew Hershey was at number 4. We now call that Mangus Mills. It was in the mill was built by Andrew Hershey. There's a couple generations of Hersheys, and finally a female with the last name of Hershey married a Mangus, and the rest is history there. Over here at number 5, that's about where Nashville is. How many people knew we had a Nashville in York County? So it's in Jackson Township. It's out 116. There's a nice little golf course there, and in that area. I guess it's called Cool Creek. But anyways, the new trolley line out of Spring Grove goes right through there, and that's Christian Hershey's property. There's still a Hershey cemetery located just off the trolley trail that you can go visit. It doesn't go back the early 1800s. It doesn't go back to the 1700s. But anyhow, that was all the Hershey land. Then we get into some early roads, and we're going to talk about those next. But many of the indigenous paths became established roads, 35 to 40 foot wide, able to handle wagon trains passing each other. The map shows 5 of the earliest roads in the area. There were few established roads created elsewhere in the county during this time. Interestingly, all these early roads led into Maryland, at least the ones in the south end of town, or the county. First one we'll talk about, there's Hanover. It's in that number 2 area, and that light blue line, you see the Monocacy. We'll talk about that next, but the yellow line is the Monocacy, the light blue line. That's Route 94 coming out of Hanover. And but that's was later, by 1800s, called the Hanover to Baltimore Turnpike. It was also called the Patapsco Road. This road is the first road surveyed west of the Susquehanna River in 1736. Conewaga settlement, or Hanover, to the Patapsco River or Baltimore, and so it went down to there. The Patapsco River is what the Inner Harbor is. Goes out towards Hanover, Maryland. BWI goes over that way and actually creates that whole Inner Harbor down there. That's Patapsco River, and so that's where we get that name. But that was established all under a Maryland charter. The 1820 map one map shows Route 94 in York County, turns into Route 30 in Carroll County. Road markers shown are from Richard Resch's book, Where Was Working Tavern. So these are just, by 1800, they actually created a turnpike, and these were mile markers all the way down through there that Rick photographed. And what you have to do is remember, again, this was 1736. York wasn't laid out till 1741. Usually in histories, seems like York gets the big headlines. I like to give a little bit of push to the western side of the county. So anyhow. The next one we're going to look at is the Monocacy. That's that yellow line, starts off as green. Actually should have gone all the way to the north or upper right-hand corner, but green, and then it comes down yellow all the way down. That's the Monocacy. But that was a part of an indigenous trail from Wrightsville, York County, down to the Monocacy River near what would become Frederick, Maryland. It was an extension to the Conestoga Road, which came from Philadelphia to Lancaster, then through what would become York. The road was the first road west of the Susquehanna River to be surveyed under a Pennsylvania charter. Again, this was 1739, before this York was created. Matter of fact, York probably wouldn't have been created except for this road. The road basically followed Route 30, or 462 now, out of York to 116. The earliest route was along Wolf's Church Road in West Manchester Township. Next it turns southwest onto 116, and at the circle in Spring Grove, or east of Spring Grove, then it follows the old Hanover Road through Mangus Mills, and then left onto Mangus Mills Road, and I'm probably losing it at this point, but it gets back to 116 and heads on into Hanover. When it gets through the square of Hanover, it goes towards Littlestown, which wasn't there at that time, continues on down into Maryland to Frederick, Maryland. And eventually it headed south into Virginia and into the Carolinas, also known as the Great Wagon Road. So a lot of our ancestors came over this way, crossed the Susquehanna, settled into this area. If you're going back into the 1700s and 1800s, they had to travel that way virtually to get here. And if you have ancestors that made their way down into the Virginias and further south, pretty good chance they came that way also, coming through here. Then we had the Gettysburg Pike. From York, it followed Route 30. Now, a lot of these roads, when they did them, the surveys overlapped, so they shared a common road. I didn't see this survey yet, but it probably started at the Codorus Creek and Market Street and headed west. And then it stays on the same thing as the Monocacy till you get to the split right there, 116 and Route 30 west of York, where the Wolf House is. Matter of fact, is because of this road, it wasn't until this road was put in that the Wolf House, which is for sale, became a tavern and started there, but it continued on. And again, that thing continued west all the way to Hagerstown and down south, and this was another major road. It too was called the Great Wagon Road. So you'll see on surveys, land, if you're looking up land surveys or whatever, you'll see the mention of Great Road. Basically, it meant this was a substantial road. Here was a really substantial road for the day, but you will see that mention on these roads. Now we get to the, whoops, I missed that one. That's the Wolf House Tavern up there, 1762. There's the Weiss Tavern, which is now called the Hoke House. In the middle there, it's a big barn. And down here's another tavern that still exists. This is right where Mangus Mills Road comes out to 116 west of Spring Grove. And that house is still there on there. So those are all part of the Monocacy Road. All right, the next one is the Smith Road, Smithland Road, and Joppa Road Extended. This was done in two parts. We now call it the Southern Susquehanna Trail. Some people, my brother-in-law just did at our talk the other week at our Historical Society on the Susquehanna Trail. He started in the 1900s, but the trail actually goes back further than that, and you can see in 1765. But the first part was done about 1745. It went from York, city of York, down to around the Glen Rock exit, and then down that way. And then by 1765, they extended it on down to Joppa, or the Joppa Road, on down to Baltimore. Again, before Baltimore was Joppa. Joppa was right where the Gunpowder River dumps into the Chesapeake Bay. And so that's where that's at. So those where some of those names come from. And basically this picture over here on the right, that's Jacobus. That house or building is still there. Is that Water Street? John, what is that going down to Lake Williams? Yeah, but that's Water Street? Yeah, okay. Well, that goes down to Lake Williams. That place is still there, but that was one of the earliest taverns. Basically, Jacobus started, it was about two taverns. There was one other guy by the name of John Snyder that lived had a house in town, but these two taverns were in Jacobus. That's what kind of began to put them on the map. A lot of wagon stop there. Down below here's Loganville. This is a 1907 postcard, and I don't know exactly what year that was taken, but that gate you see going across there, that would have been part of the toll road or toll. That would have been located, actually there was two locations for the toll road at one time. One was pretty far north of Loganville, but this one would have been located just below Orr Street. There's an empty lot just, if you're facing north here, just off to the right, there's an empty lot right there, and that's about where that where those gates are on there. But that's so that's the Susquehanna Trail. And once again, all roads lead to Maryland. We're going to look at the Patapsco. This is my favorite one because it cuts right through the heart. That's that orange line going right through there. You can see the Susquehanna Trail on the right, and then you get down here to the orange line. That's the Patapsco. We're going to talk about that briefly. Patapsco number 2, I'll call it, because we had number 1 over out of Hanover. This was surveyed in 1760, and it went from York to Baltimore. It started right at the Market Street and the Codorus Creek. It went on a diagonal right over towards Penn Street, around the Penn Street Market, went on a diagonal. How many are familiar with Salem Square in the city of York? So it's probably not a big area that you'd want to become familiar with. But there's a road there that goes on a diagonal from Penn Street, cuts over to College Avenue. But when I was a kid growing up, I grew up at the west end of town, not quite that area, but a couple blocks further west. Walk over there, I had friends and relatives over in that area. And as a kid, I'd wonder, why is that street on a diagonal? All these nice blocks going this way, east, west, and all this, but that road goes right on an angle. Why? Well, I didn't find out till I got into studying this history down here. That was the Patapsco Road going through there. It's called Salem Avenue. It goes down to York, New Salem, and it goes out College Avenue Extended, and there's it was been rerouted a couple times because there's a quarry out there in West York. But nevertheless, it ends up down through New Salem, south of New Salem on 616. When you get down, just before you head down the hill into Seven Valleys, it goes off to the right, Cemetery Road, past Legler's Church, hits Panther Hill Road. Probably most of you never heard of Panther Hill Road, but goes down there, heads south through past Schaefer's Church, hits Schaefer's Church Road, goes out to 516, right where the old ant plant was, and right where the old Broadbecks, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But anyhow, and then it heads south down to Styx, and from Styx it heads over to Lineborough and down to Manchester, Maryland. So it's quite a diverse route, a lot of different roads. It still exists, but it just goes by a lot of different names. It never became a major road, and I know you can't read all these names, but these are two taverns. This one here in the middle, that is down at Broadbecks. This was taken around 1898 when Louis Barbihan family, he was the son-in-law of Mr. Broadbeck, and but he had a store there. It was a tavern, and it goes back quite a ways, back to the early 1700s, very early tavern along the Patapsco Road. The next tavern down here on the right, this is the one started by John Hetricks, and I guess his son Christian Hetricks, who then sold it to my 4 times great-grandfather, David Jones. So that's no longer standing, unfortunately. If you were going to go down there in the Styx and go right to go to Lineborough, this would have been just on your left. That's no longer there. So it has a pretty long history in there. But those are all fun things to dig into. Well, let's look at the settlers. Again, I love maps. You see a lot of maps in my presentations, but here's a fun thing to look at. But all of our townships, they didn't start off like they are now. You see Shrewsbury was a much bigger township back in the day. You got North, East, and Hopewell townships on the east side. You got Springfield Township was cut out of Shrewsbury, so it's only a quarter of what it used to be. You got Manheim Township was pretty big, and out of it became Heidelberg, Penn Township, West Manheim Township. We have some people from West Manheim here, and but yeah, that was much bigger. Even Heidelberg was much bigger, and then so you get into a lot of different areas. Codorus wasn't until 1738 that Codorus got cut in half, and we'll talk a little bit about that, not in too much depth, but you can see just all the breakdown. But the first and second generation European settlers quickly moved into our area because of all these nice roads, high percentage being German heritage. The early first generation Europeans often settled into Berks, Montgomery, Chester, Lancaster County. When west of the Susquehanna opened up, first and second generation families quickly migrated west, seeking cheap land. Although those with German heritage were in all over the county, a particular high concentration of Germans settled in the southwest corner of York County. Local historian John Gibson wrote in his 1886 history of York County that in 1883 the population of York County with German heritage was 84% of the population. Codorus had 94%. Manheim had 94%. North Codorus had 85%. Springfield Township had 72%. Heidelberg had 66%. And Shrewsbury had 83%. So you can see some pretty heavy concentrations of German. That Jakey's Amish barbecue, that's actually over in Lancaster. I just got a kick out of seeing that sign. So I just put it up there for fun. But as you can see, and actually, we do have a lot of Amish. I'm sure they're coming into Shrewsbury too, but I know over in our area, a lot of Amish are moving in and taking over these farms and preserving the land, which is a good thing, in my opinion. Okay, church. So with all these fine German folk coming in here, they brought their religion: Lutheran, Reformed, Mennonite, German Baptist, Dunkers, and Brethren. Although Hanover McSherrystown can lay claim to the oldest Lutheran, 1731, and the oldest Roman Catholic, 1730 congregation west of Susquehanna, Manheim Township has the oldest Brethren, or German Baptist, or Dunkard Church congregation in 1738, west of the Susquehanna. Originally called the Conewaga Congregation, now it's called Black Rock Church of the Brethren. And they're down just a little bit northeast of Lineborough, almost into Maryland. But the Codorus Church of the Brethren, or on Dunkard Church Road over here in Springfield Township, was an early spin-off of Black Rock Church, and so they were created in 1758. But so yeah, you have Black Rock Church Brethren, bottom left over there. That building wasn't built till about 1880. Up to that point, they met in barns and houses. So from all the mid 1700s all the way into the late 1800s, they met there, and they finally built that. They've have expanded since then, and but they used to. It was a 2-day event going to church back then, because they would basically go there, stay overnight in people's houses. All right, North Codorus' earliest church, St. Peter's, which also known as Lishey's, a Reformed, now UCC congregation, was founded in 1750. That's top center. Is by Jacob Lishey, located in the Wyoto area near 516 and 116. How many ever heard of Wyoto? We got a couple folks here. So yeah, if you basically right around Lishey's church, which you may not be from, that's off the beaten path up there, but if you head south towards Jefferson and you get, I guess, a couple miles out of Spring Grove, that's the Wyoto area, and that was just a post office down there. Okay, Springfield Township, the earliest church is Friedensal's Schuster's Union, 1752, starting off as both Lutheran and Reformed. It's located south of Seven Valleys on White Church Road, which is off of Yellow Church Road, which, by the way, the Yellow Church Road was the spinoff. That was the Reformed church. It moved down the road. But that's Codorus Township and has an early Lutheran Reformed congregation. Now, yeah, that's in Codorus, which is St. Jacob's Stone Church near Glenville. It was founded in 1756, and until recently it was a Union church. So you see that off here in the left, top left. So you got Friedensal's over here in the top right, the White Church, which is why they call it White Church. Last on the list is not there because of its age. It's only about 150 years old. Rather, its uniqueness in this area of anti-Baptist, Lutheran, Reformed, and Methodist. St. Peter and Paul's German Reformed Catholic Church, located in Codorus Township. How many have ever heard of St. Peter and Paul's Church? Not too many on that one. Some of you guys don't read my newsletters. All right. So the church stood between 1871 to 1975 when the Harrisburg Archdiocese had it torn down. This was a mission church, the St. John the Baptist Church in New Freedom, which is the second oldest Roman Catholic church in York County. In 1853, a group of Catholic families from Kurhessen, Germany, came to Codorus Township. This was not the same area that the bulk of your Palatinites came from. A lot of us are descendants of, but this was a little bit further north in the Hesse area of Germany. But they came here, and like a lot of times, there was political and religious strife over in the area. But they came here into Baltimore, got on the train, and headed north. And they settled in the New Freedom area, and they purchased land in a valley south of Hanover Junction. The valley became known as Catholic Valley. The road where it stood is called Catholic Valley Road, near LaRue, on the eastern edge of Codorus Township. A small cemetery is all that's there now. But it had a fairly long history. It wasn't used that heavily by the church. It was pretty much a mission church, but they kept it going for quite some time. And here's somebody was asked about, am I doing this in Pennsylvania German? Here's the German you'll be getting up here. Learning at schoolhouse, that's how you translate that. But anyhow, the Germans who settled in here did believe in education. Not necessarily, it wasn't up through 12th grade or college, but they did believe in education and thought it the role of the church to provide the education of reading, writing, and arithmetic. The reading and writing portion being based on the Bible. Some of the earliest parochial schools in the area were in Codorus Township. The oldest known is Lishey's. Again, these are parochial schools run by the church, which dates back to 1747, was held at Reverend Lishey's house up until his retirement. They then built a stone schoolhouse across the road from the church at the corner Amick and Ambow Road. It is now a residence. So that's that top left one. You see they had all the modern conveniences of air conditioning back then. So if you recall that sad incident last year where those policemen were shot, this would have been in the background of the news, a number of the news reports where they were standing there reporting on what was happening in North Codorus, and this would have been in the background of that. So that's right in that area where that was taken. Below is St. Jacob's. If you look at St. Jacob's Church on Stone Church Road, face it, to the right is this building right here. It's a stone building, 2-story. Back when it was first built, it was 1-story. They added a second story in 1903. So that was the original parochial school. The size of it probably would have been 2 rooms in there. But anyhow, but over a period, more and more parochial schools were added. By 1831, Pennsylvania was the only northern state without a comprehensive school system. Thaddeus Stevens, then PA state representative, he was of the anti-Masonic Party. That was before the Republican Party, and but he was of the anti-Masonic Party. And PA George Wolfe, he was a Jacksonian Democrat Party, and that's like, you know, like today between Republicans and Democrats. They were just really far opposite. It's amazing these two guys came together to agree on anything. But they were advocates of the common school, told the legislatures that the state 400,000 school children, only 150,000 were attending school. The politicians decided a broader legislative mandate was needed if the area of common schools was to succeed. The mandate was needed if the area of common schools was, the School Act of 1834 provided that authority while still allowing residents of individual school districts to vote to adopt its requirements. Only about half of the Pennsylvania nearly 1,000 school districts promptly voted to come under the provision of the act. The rest delayed it for some time. Codorus and North Codorus Township adopted in the early 1850s. The last Codorus Valley Township, Manheim Township, not until 1870. So if you look at these old schoolhouses, if you know when the school system started back then, that's about when those schoolhouses were built. And so that began in earnest the one-room school, public schools in the Codorus Valley. One thing to keep in mind, back at that time and until 1951, each township, each borough had their own school district. So each one had their own board, and they called the shots on what was going to happen with the school in those areas. By the 40s, 50s, they were starting to blend a couple of them together and make mini districts. But by 1951, that's when we get into the school districts we know today. Then we get into some higher learning. This became a thing towards the late 1800s. In 1891, 2 prominent Codorus physicians, known as Dr. John D. Keller and Dr. Wesley Stix, and it was his family that basically changed the name from Hettricks to Stix, down there established the Glenville Academy, an institution for higher education. This place just amazes me because it's in the middle of nowhere. Why would you put a high school there? But they did. And but basically, A.W. Eichelberger of Hanover was one of the largest stockholders in 1894. The remaining shares were purchased by Captain Eichelberger and renamed Eichelberger Academy. Sometime before 1896, he transferred owner to a local Lutheran church, which I suspect was Stone Church. I haven't found out which one it is yet. The same year, Captain Eichelberger went on to build a high school in Hanover. It became known as the Eichelberg Academy, not Eichelberger, but Eichelberg Academy. You'll see that on the front of the building. I'm not sure why he dropped the ER. Meanwhile, the school's name in Glenville was restored to Glenville Academy, and in 1901, the academy was transformed in Codorus Township High School. And this was the first township high school established in York County. It was not the first high school. Yeah, York High gets the notoriety of that. I think that was around 1870, and maybe some of the other boroughs like Glen Rock and some of the others had high schools before that, but this was the first township high school. Then the institution featured a 3-acre campus, natural science laboratory, 600-volume library. Over 100 school teachers received their education at the academy. The second photo at the bottom down here, and that's the school at a later time. It continued as a high school till 1951 when Southern School District built Susquehanna High School, merging Glen Rock, New Freedom, and Codorus Township High Schools into one building in Shrewsbury Township. The building then continued as an elementary school till 1973, and then since then it's become apartments down in the Glenville area. We actually have this original stock certificate. It's $1 to buy a share of stock for the school. Let's get into politics. I'm going to take a drink of water before we do that. As we look at our politics today, we will look at one party or the other and say there sure are some crazy radicals in that group. It's not like it used to be. I'm not sure things have changed all that much. By the early 1800s, these people were not that distant from the memories of the dictatorial monarchs of Europe, of which they gained independence 50 years prior. This was a major influence on the rural folks who were very conservative and pro-small government. This was the core of the Jefferson-Jacksonian Democrat back in the 1800s. The town of Jefferson, Codorus Township, was considered the center of power for the Jefferson-Jacksonian Democrats. That's why it got its name in the southwest portion of New York County. It's also why North Codorus eventually broke off. They stayed Democrat, but nevertheless, they decided they wanted the power, not Jefferson and Codorus Township. So you have a divide in 1838 of the two townships. But that's a whole other topic. But anyhow, the concern back in 1836 was whether we should have a national banking system or not. The petition from Codorus had 8 resolutions and was sent to the Pennsylvania governor. The governor of PA in 1836 was Joseph Rittner. He was an anti-Masonic party. The president of the USA was Andrew Jackson. He was a Democrat. Very much opposed to the national banking. Matter of fact, this was one of his major planks for running for office. But we're going to give you, don't have enough time to go into all this, fortunately for all this, but I'm going to just give you a little bit of background on banking. But basically, starting with President George Washington and the Congress at the time, signed into existence the first national bank, 1791 to 1811. It had 20-year charter. Again, in 1816, the government issued or chartered a second bank of the U.S., 1816 to 1836, a third charter. The topic of the petition was defeated in 1836. The United States did not put in place a national banking system until 1913, and there's lots of politics behind all that too. When the Federal Reserve was created, 2 of the 8 resolutions I'm going to quote you. The first one starts off, resolved that the Bank of the United States be warned to pay no monies under its present charter to the state of Pennsylvania, as all money so paid shall be paid at the peril of said institution. And if the governor shall demand any money covenant to the state in the bank charter, he shall be accountable for it, and not the people who never agreed to be sold. The wording is always very interesting to me that they use here. But the last one of all these 8 resolutions starts off with resolve that we will maintain our rights as free men, and that we will defend those rights even at the expense of the best blood in our veins. Now, they don't say we're going to shed blood. They just say we will be willing to shed their blood. Although I suspect had something going to head, things might have got a little nasty. But in this newspaper article, there were 128 names I put up there. I don't know if you can read them or not, but basically highlighted in yellow is my Frederick Kraft, my ancestor who founded Jefferson. He's there on the right. And H. Stambach, I'm pretty sure there were 2 Henry Stambachs in the area at the time. I'm pretty sure that's probably my wife's side of the family, 4 times great-grandfather. And if you could read all those, you might see some of your own relatives there. But pretty much everyone was Democrats in the area, and very, very strong Jacksonian Democrats. Let's jump one here. Let's get into Dick's Bloomery. As we ironed out the politics, we're going to get into some iron. Dick's Bloomery, Spring Forge. Peter Dick's Bloomery and Forge, 1755 to 1851. Iron was discovered at least by 1743 in the Pigeon Hills in Heidelberg Township, in nearby Paradise Township. Within 12 years, a Quaker by the name of Peter Dix purchased land and started a bloomery, and soon after a water-powered forge along the west branch of the Codorus. This was the oldest iron producer west of the Susquehanna. The exact location is unknown, other than it was right in the area of P.H. Glatfelder, now Pixel Paper Mill. There's been so much expansion and changes in that area that there's just nothing left. It's probably somewhere in the pond, so no one knows quite where that was at. This is an old survey map from the 1700s of Peter Dick's property. You see the Codorus Creek, you see the mill race. The very top is what's also called Bunch Creek, goes up into the Pigeon Hills up there. So that was its water source. But there are a couple different things. You have a bloomery. It's a cheap way of making iron. See over here on the left, that's a bloomery made out of clay. Inside you make iron the same way you do in big furnaces. Basically, iron ore You got charcoal made from wood, and you got limestone you put in there, and out comes a little chunk of iron. And then they would put it in a power hammer, which is here, and forge it, and basically pound it together, get all the air pockets out of it, and that would become pig iron, or a bloom of iron over here. I guess it's a bloom of iron when it first comes out of the forge, becomes pig iron after they beat it into shape. And this was just raw material you'd send to the blacksmiths, whatever, so they would make various things out of it, and horseshoes, swords, guns, you name it. They would just cut a piece off and make what they're doing. But the whole forge process, there was also a bellows here, that brown thing on the left. That was also operated by a water-powered mill, which would have pushed air into the furnace to help heat it up to 2,000 plus degrees. But that's the basic function of a forge. We also had a furnace in the area, Marianne furnace. Jerry is working on this, trying to find it. By next week, you're going to have the exact location, right? All right. He just admitted to it. You heard it. So anyhow, Marianne furnace. The forge was the oldest forge west of the Susquehanna. This is the oldest furnace west of the Susquehanna. This is at the far west end of Codorus State Park on Black Rock Road, and it dates back to 1761, and it basically was owned by George Ross, who's one of the signers of the Declaration. He was an attorney in Lancaster. He lived from 1730 to 1779, and he had a descendant by the name of Betsy Ross that is part of that. But anyhow, there's a couple other owners. George Stevenson, William Thompson, and Mark Bird formed a partnership and leased 4 acres from John Hunsinger for the purpose of making iron. And so there's lots of reasons we won't go into. It's not an in-depth study on that as to why they would have settled there. But they needed lots of wood. They needed iron from the Pigeon Hills, and there was even iron in the immediate area of this. Some of their products were cannonballs. That's a 4-inch cannonball that was found on the property. And over here on the left, they also made these, that's a 5-plate furnace. And you'll see a number of those. If you go down to Williamsburg, they have one of those from Marianne Furnace on display. A complete one. So that's a pretty neat find. They made some 10-plate furnaces and lots of other stuff, kettles, you name it. But this was made at the furnace. Once George Ross bought the forge in Spring Grove or Spring Forge, then all the iron ore was converted to iron here. The iron from here was sent over to the forge and then beat into a little bit denser material over there. So there's things like what you see there can be directly cast, and there's other things they need it for other products where they have to really strengthen the iron and beat it into shape. So that's some of that part. But let's look at railroads. This is we had a lot of railroads in York County, and believe it or not, and particularly in the Codorus Valley area. By 1895, the Codorus Valley had an abundance of railroads, more than any other area in the county. The main reason, iron ore. Although Dillsburg, and Jerry will check me on this, although Dillsburg can claim the most iron ore tonnage mined, the Codorus Valley had the most iron mines. The destination for much of the iron ore was Ashland, Cockeysville, Maryland, and Lancaster County, where it was smelted. With the advent of the railroad, coal was now being used for the newly built furnaces that could handle the higher heat. None of the York County furnaces were converted to coal. The use of coal in furnaces in Maryland and Lancaster County made the York County furnaces obsolete. Although most iron production disappeared by the mid-1800s, iron mining increased until towards the end of the 1800s. And that created demand for railroads. So might be a little hard to see, but those red lines on there, and also the ones I have the numbers on, those were the different railroads. We're going to do a quick run of those things. This map is 1895. It does not show the Stewartstown Railroad for some reason. I've asked a couple people why it doesn't show up there. No one has an answer. You do see the Mall and Paul coming up over here on the right, and there's a little bit of a railroad up there around Dillsburg. But basically, a heavy concentration of railroads were all down here in the southwest corner of York County. But you have the Baltimore-Susquehanna Railroad, 1838, Northern Central. Most are familiar with that. Came right up through this area. We have, it ran from Baltimore into Pennsylvania through New Freedom, Shrewsbury, Glen Rock, Hanover Junction, Seven Valleys, Glatfelder Station, and on to York, PA. Later, this line became known as the Northern Central, and this is currently the Heritage Rail Trail. And so it's a pretty neat area. You see Howard Tunnel up here at the top, or top right. That's the second oldest active train tunnel in the country. I believe the oldest one is up in New England. You have Smizer Station over here in the Seven Valleys. That building still exists. That's where they have antiques as you go on down Church Street in Seven Valleys. This is from the railroad side. And here's Hanover Junction. We'll be talking about in a minute, but that was created in 1852. I just think this is a neat picture looking down at the junction. The Hanover Branch, 1852. This was a second railroad coming off the Northern Central. And the photo on the right was taken Green Valley Road a couple years ago. I looked to see where this picture was taken, and with the aid of my friend's basically drone, that's it, drone, we were able to get above the trees and look over and match the hillside. So this is close to Strickhauser Station, Brush Valley on Green Valley Road. That's where that is taken, going west into Jefferson. But anyhow, this is other picture on the right here. That was taken right where the feed mill place is, just north of Jefferson. The Hanover Branch went right through there. Started at Hanover Junction, so there was nothing there prior to the Hanover Branch. And that big curved Junction Road comes around there. The train would have gone around that way and then began to turn west. It went all the way over through Strickhauser Station, Cold Springs, and then Jefferson. Eventually what became Bachman Valley Station, up to Porter Sidling, and then on through Smith Station, and then to Hanover. And so basically it went from Hanover then to Gettysburg up through New Oxford. If you, oftentimes you do history tours up at Gettysburg, they'll take you just below the Eternal Light Monument, and the railroad goes through there. This was actually the Hanover Branch being extended west of Hanover at that time. They only came to the station in Gettysburg during the Battle of Gettysburg. And that same railroad is what Abraham Lincoln took, heading north, and then took west, going over to Gettysburg. And of course, the Northern Central was also what Abraham Lincoln's funeral train took, heading on his way out to Illinois. But anyhow, after the local iron ore was no longer being mined by the late 1800s, the Hanover Branch Railroad no longer carried the heavy freight it originally did. Its use continued to decline until the 1920s, when it carried the concrete to build the roads that would obsolete this railroad and others. A portion of the railroad was removed in 1927, and that was from the Hanover Junction to Bachman Valley Junction, which we're going to get to that next, and I better hurry up here. We've got a couple more to go. So 1871, Bachman Valley Railroad was incorporated. Beginning at Ebbville in Bachman Valley area, Carroll County, the line connected the Hanover Branch at Bachman Valley Junction near Crafts Mill. It traveled north through Melrose, Limeboro, Glenville, Green Ridge, which became Broadbeck, Sinsheim, Valley Junction. Its purpose was to bring iron ore from Bachman Valley area of Carroll County, north of Westminster, just to the south of Valley Junction. Or just to the south of Valley Junction, there was a major coaling and water station. I guess I should have, we'll go back real quick and, went too far. So this coaling station, that's not Hanover Junction, that was at Bachman Valley. That's right in front of where the dam was, or the dam is, for Lake Marburg. So we had a major coaling station, and Jerry and I went visiting there one time, and there are a few remnants of what you can see there, including the base foundation for the water towers and some remnants of that whole coaling section up there. All right, let's get back over here. So that's Bachman Valley. They even had an ice cream stand there. But you can see where it started down here at Ebbvale in Maryland, came up here, the Western Maryland, started down here at the bottom, came up through Connecticut at a unusual name called intersection. Those two railroads came together, so that railroad is still in existence today. And then we get into Porter Sidling. There's a couple other railroads. I'm not going to go into all those. Came through Spring Grove. Glatfelder got big enough they needed more railroad service, plus they were still pulling iron out of the Pigeon Hills. So all this became important. Porter Sidling has an interesting history too, but we won't get into that. So we're going to conclude with Broadbecks. How many have heard of the Broadbecks Band? So it's been around a long time. Second oldest York County community band still in existence, began in 1878. The band was named after the community we will be talking about. The community started around the Tavern Hotel, which began along the Patapsco Road in Codorus Township. That's at the corner of Schaefer's Church Road and 516. In 1770, Daniel Kramer obtained a license to have a tavern hotel on his property, and then we get into a bunch of others. By 1853, it was sold to George Broadbeck, and by 1863, it was renamed the Broadbeck's Post Office. And again, this was at the corner of Schaefer's Church and 516. Thus began the community known as Broadbeck. By 1874, George's son Samuel B. Broadbeck took over the establishment, but discontinued the tavern license in 1877. So that's that building up there. The portion of the building on the right, that's the top part there, that's actually made of log. The rest of it was built at a later date. And I could tell you more about that, but we won't go into that. In 1871, the Botman Valley, as we talked about, railroad completed just a few miles to the west. So you can see the orange line, that's Patapsco Road coming through there. And the black line, that's the Botman Valley Railroad. They weren't that far apart. Basically, the Botman Valley Railroad took all the freight traffic away from the Patapsco Road, and it started coming up that way. And Sam Broadbeck saw that, and he decided he's going to shift his business over to a new area. So you got from that red star up there at the first Broadbeck over to the second one. He bought different buildings. He built a creamery. He built not a hotel, but apartments for his workers, a general store, and he moved Ice House. He moved everything down to what was Green Ridge. And by 1881, he petitioned the government to have a post office of Broadbeck moved to the new location. In one stroke of the pen, Broadbeck moved from the red star to the yellow star up there. So that changed the location. When I first moved down into Jefferson area, I always heard about these Broadbecks. It's like, where is Broadbeck? It seemed like it always different locations. Well, the reason is it moved. And so you have that whole change up right there. So the two Broadbecks. The original Broadbecks did not totally disappear. There's still a cluster of older houses. You see that in the bottom right. Right there. You're looking basically from the east, looking west. 516, Schaefer's Church Road is off to the right. It's off the map, but those houses are still there today. Where that yellow box is, that's approximately where the tavern and store was, over there. But this area also includes the large home you see on the left here. That was built by Samuel Broadbeck, and that was designed by architect from York, John Dempwolf, and also restored old room schoolhouse, Broadbeck Schoolhouse. It's part of the Miller Carriage Museum, which is open on special occasions, so that has not shut. How many have ever been to the Miller Museum? So it's a pretty neat place. I really like that. But the original tavern, yeah, I said was about where that rectangle was. There's also a block of industrial buildings that was built by AMP. Originally, it was attached to an older frame building. That was the community band building, which is where the Broadbecks band practiced. By the 1950s, it was purchased by AMP, where one of the early AMP facilities was located. The original tavern store once again acquired a liquor license in 1933 at the end of Prohibition. It became known as Bowman's, then Yo's, and finally the Country Inn. How many people spent too many hours at the Country Inn? So anyhow, the trains still run through the new Broadbecks. All the businesses have closed except Snyder's Mill. It's been operated by the same family for over 150 years, and it's for sale if you want to buy it. But I'll just go back here quick. But basically, the original post office window is off here to the left. That's in the Broadbeck School Museum. And over here on the right, that's owned by Mr. Snyder down in at the mill. So, and that's Samuel Broadbeck's in the middle. So with that, we'll conclude. With all that, the industrious people, the natural resources, the industry that created demand for the roads, the railroads, the churches, schools, and politics have shaped our local cultures. With that, we end the presentation of the Codorus Valley, a general history. Obviously, much more could be said. We have a rich history, one worth knowing about. So you can come and visit our museum. If you get those brochures in the back, give you an idea when we're open to the public. So do we have time for questions, comments, or anything? Any questions, comments?
Was the tobacco and cigar industry prominent in this part of the county?
Oh, very much so, and not quite as heavy as Doylestown and Red Line. They were the capital of cigars, but we did have, Jefferson had 2 or 3, Seven Valleys had 2 or 3 cigar factories, and of course some were out in the community, so all over the place, including Hanover. They had plenty. Littlestown and McSherrystown all had, you know, Spring Grove had a couple cigar factories, New Salem. That was just cheap. It wasn't a big capital expense to start up a tobacco factory, make cigars. It was somewhat. I did some research on that. Matter of fact, one of the newsletters that I have, not all of them are that, talks about Hanover Junction, but they were actually pulling tobacco out of Virginia and also even Cuba. They were bringing Cuban tobacco up here. Anything else? All right, well, thank you for coming out on this August night. Appreciate it.